Hello everybody! Today I'm going to show you how I turned this felt throw blanket into a soft and snuggly coat. That's today on Refashioning with Rachel. First, I arranged the blanket with one long double fold going down one of its sides. I folded in half a sweater that fit me nicely and placed it on top of the blanket, lining up the folds, and traced around the seams, adding 1 centimeter for seam allowance. Then, using a ruler, I extended the side seam starting at the waist and flaring it out at a slight angle. Then I cut this out, and since I was cutting through 4 layers, I cut out 2 of these back pieces at once. I set one of these pieces aside and folded the other piece in half. And I cut it open along that fold. I used a ruler to extend the neckline down into the bust area. And I cut that out, and I softened that angle in the middle. And set those pieces aside. Again, working on a double fold, I placed the sleeve of my sweater along that fold and traced around it, adding a centimeter for seam allowance on the underside and around the armhole, and adding 1 inch for seam allowance at the sleeve. Then I cut out both of the sleeves and made a little notch in the center of the shoulder seam. With right sides facing, I pinned the front pieces to the back piece at the shoulder seams. And I sewed the shoulder seams. This felt fabric was really nice to work with because the edges didn't fray, so I didn't worry too much about finishing them. With the shoulder seams stitched, I could sew the sleeves into the armholes. I laid out the bodice with the right sides facing up and lined up the sleeves to the armholes. Then lining up the notch that I made in the sleeve with the shoulder seam, and then working from each end of the armhole toward the shoulder seam, I pinned the sleeve to the armhole. I did the same thing with the other sleeve and sewed along where I pinned. While I was at the sewing machine, I took a strip of fabric, folded it in half, and made a stitch about 1 centimeter away from the fold. I trimmed away some of the excess fabric and turned it right side out using a safety pin. And I measured out 2 pieces 6 inches in length. Now that the sleeves are attached, I folded the coat with right sides facing and pinned all along the underarm seam and the side seams. I measured where I wanted my belt loops to be, and I folded each loop in half with the seam on the inside and sandwiched it in between the two layers of the side seam, lining up the raw edges and securing it with a pin. Then I sewed the underarm seam and the side seam all in one go. I measured the length of the opening of the coat, and I cut out a strip of fabric that was 8 inches wide and as long as the opening. I had to piece in another strip of fabric to make it long enough. And then I folded the strip in half lengthwise, adding in some pins to keep it in place. Then I pinned that strip all along the opening of the coat, lining up all the raw edges. I trimmed off some of the excess fabric and sewed all along the opening of the coat. And as I was sewing, I made sure that all 3 layers of the raw edges were lined up. When I finished sewing the band onto the coat, I opened up that seam and folded the seam allowance away from the opening and sewed it down to the coat. This made that seam less bulky and added in a little detail. Next, I did a single fold hem on the bottom of the coat, and I did a double fold hem around the sleeves. For the belt, I cut out a strip of fabric that was 6 inches wide and twice the length of my waist. I folded down and ironed a centimeter from the top of that strip. Then I folded up and ironed a centimeter from the bottom of the strip. I folded in a centimeter from one side, and then folded the whole thing in half and ironed it. I added some pins to keep it secure, and I sewed all along the edges, starting with the folded edge, and pivoting and sewing at each of the corners. And when the belt was finished, this project was completed. So this is a reminder of how this project looked before. And this is what it looks like now. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you did, and have a beautiful day.